I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome my friend and colleague, Peter Dodds from the University of Vermont. He's an applied mathematician, but oh, so much more than that. He works at the Vermont Complex Systems Center and UVM's, am I allowed to say UVM anymore?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, I thought Vermont had rebranded.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
supposed
no,
to say something else.
Oh, yeah, you know that branding's not good.
Yeah, so, University of Vermont in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. I know him most through collaborations and work on storytelling at very large scale. He and his group, the Vermont Complex Systems Center, which if you haven't visited their website, you must visit their website because they have by far the best logos of any group on Earth. So that was really what attracted me. Sorry, your work attracted me as well, but the logo attracted me to try and collaborate.
There's nothing there.
With Peter. He's in charge of the computational story lab, which I think is really at the forefront of looking at narrative stories and all of the component parts that contribute to these complex systems. So I'm going to stop talking. I love Peter's work so much that I could talk for, and people know that I can talk for a really long time if I'm not stopped. But please join me in welcoming Peter here to give just one of the most wonderfully titled talks I've seen in a very long time. So.
Thank you, Tim. It's a great pleasure to be here. Right, so I have, let's see if this works. 45 minutes, right?
That's right.
Okay. So
counting down.
With some speed running, but we'll see what we can do. Yeah, I will define some of these. It's basically going to be two big bodies of work that connect together. And one is going to be about essential meaning. The other is going to be about fictional characters, which maybe doesn't seem like they should match up, but they will. I don't think these are, well, okay, so many, many years of work here. All right, I have a cat, that's why there's a cat here. And these people are now 21 and 23, there you go. Others of those. All right, okay, so right, we've had a lot of funding over the years. Right now, sort of our main ones are Mass Mutual. We have a great relationship with them. The CEO went to UVM. We've got a number of students who've gone off to run their data science group. And they seem to be in a position where they want to keep people living longer than they expect. So it's kind of a nice company to work with. Anyway, so that's been a good funding source. And we currently have, and Tim is associated with this, SOP, Science of Online Corporate Knowledge and Stories. It's a $20 million grant from NSF. There are some fun things in here. This is a raccoon called Richter. There are books, and there are books in space. And this is the idea of measuring distantly, right? Distant reading, if you like. The hexagon is a little nod to Borges and Borges's library. Oh. Yeah, right? Okay, let me get this back to, should zoom in on things. All right. So meaning of meaning, this is the, so this paper is now back at Science Advances. We'll see if it makes it through, but I don't know, 1,000 hours of work into this. All right, so what's meaning? How do we measure meaning? Is this, can we put it into space? Obviously, we live in the time of LLM, so I guess yes, but we're going to be at the other end of that, right? We're going to be looking at what happens if you boil off meaning or you boil off the features of characters and get down to the essence of them. So the origin of perhaps the measuring meaning, operationalizing that, seems to be around the 40s and 50s. Osgood is the main character here, but this is an unpublished, well, it's a PhD dissertation from a young fellow who was in the Navy and combined these three things: naval sonar, the nature of meaning, and multidimensional scaling techniques, which is impressive, right? So it's the meaning of pings, and that was right. You're a sonar operator, send out the pings. They come back from some complicated submarine structure, right? And you have to figure out what's going on. So things becomes the next part here, just meaning of things in general. Semantic differential is going to be the base for all the stuff we're doing. There have been all sorts of critiques and arguments about them for a long time, but I think generally accepted. And I'll talk about why I think they work well here. So there's I think I have 50 semantic differentials, and I'll show you on the next, let me show you the next slide. Students, so of course students do this, right? So students figure this out because a professor tells them to. Let's come up with semantic differentials, right? That broadly are good antonyms of each other. So there's a whole mixture here. And then we're going to use these on a little scale. We'll evaluate things, right? And I think in some of the original was like 10 things, like maybe king and queen and some other kind of concepts. And then during basically dimensional reduction, lots of ways to do this. We will just use SVD in what we do, or PCA. They boiled it down to evaluation, potency, and activity. This is the EPA framework. Evaluation is bad, good. That does, remain the sort of dominant way of responding to something or evaluating something. Potency is weak, strong. This is how you might feel in response to something, which depends how it's phrased. And then there's this activity one. So I'm going to show that this, I'm going to argue that this actually isn't quite correct, and we'll see how we get to that. Some of it's okay, but yeah, hundreds of students, tens of things, and this is the EPA framework. I'm going to say the word ousiometrics, right? You don't have to do any of this, but basically from Ousio, we wanted a word that referred to what we're doing, because Osgood talked about measuring meaning, and it really wasn't measuring meaning. I was measuring the essence of meaning. So that's just to distinguish it. And then for fun, telenomics is the distance sensing of knowledge. Yeah, some Greek roots. All right, so there's a history here for trying to think about meaning and emotion in space. And then actually in the late 1800s, you have this idea of suggestion that maybe emotions live in 3 dimensions. And there's work, this gets very confusing. You can see the literature is completely confused with itself. In the 70s, you end up with EPA being transformed into valence, arousal, dominance. And this is used everywhere, right? VAD is a very common framework. Valence is sad, happy. You could talk about it like that, but good, bad. And then you're thinking about emotion, right? So, okay, let's go to emotion. It's not meaning in general. These guys have this EPA framework. We're going to port it over. And then it seems to be lost. People start to study whether they're the same thing, right? It gets very confused. Right? But VAD becomes the dominant thing. I'll just jump that. All right. So problems, of course, were that have been kind of overcome now. Well, of course, we just had a few words to start with, or things. Now we have tens of thousands. This is a tricky one. That, you look at a lot of corpora and the way people study corpora, that often might get stuck at types and not tokens. I mean, if we studied a forest and we gave 1 vote to each species, that would be a strange thing to do, but we sometimes do that with words. Likert scales, Likert, as he apparently was really named. They're good, and I think they're fun, but there are other ways to measure things, and so we'll have that. This is a way of ousiograms, right? So we've got this word ousio, it's where the word essence comes from. We're going to create some basically automatically annotated histograms, which can guide us. And then this is a tricky thing. If you're going to say, no one knows what valence is in general, which is sort of helpful, but you're presented in a survey, I want you to, rate the valence, and you're given these sort of balloon things at each end of good, happy, da-da-da. So it's a little bit murky. Even so, you can always just do SVD again on whatever you get up. So we'll do that. This is where I'll come back to happiness in a little bit. We have a long sort of body of work on measuring, happiness and sadness from text in this remote way. Again, valence, arousal, dominance. This is a typical kind of survey, right? It was done at the University of Florida. You had to pencil in how you responded to these, actually a list of words, which include pancakes and paradise and love. It's a strange list. Okay, so again, this is just to say that, one, you're happy, pleased, satisfied. It's a bit of a blur, right? It's a bit of a cloud. And the other end, you're unhappy, bored, which is starting to get some of that activity or activation in there. So there's a bit of mixing. Okay. ANU, this is an old say, we're not going to talk about that. All right, so Okay, so that's to say, things have come a long way. We're changing the way we're measuring things. We're obviously going to scale. There have been some updates to this, but this is, I think, the best study around. Use best real scaling. So again, 20,000 words presented to people, and ratings are simply given 4 words at a time, and you have to rate them from best to worst. It's a scaling or a rating technique that I think starts maybe in the 90s, but it's recent. It means that if you say, okay, what's the happiest or what's the saddest out of 4 things as far as you're concerned, you just make 2 choices, but it really gives you 5 orderings out of possible 6, right? You don't know about the ones in the middle. So it's efficient, it's quick, you get scores between 0 and 1. This again is to sort of, this is from that particular study to sort of show that there's this blurring for these endpoints. It's okay, but it just means it's harder to run this once you've decided it's valence, arousal, and dominance. It's harder to communicate that to people what those things are when you want them to rate. And the solution is to go back to many small-scale semantic differentials. More expensive, but that's the problem. Barney rubble means trouble. That's minus fine. So valence and arousal, that's the correlation between them there, and arousal and dominance. These are not 0, so this is somewhat problematic, and usually it's argued away with like people didn't read the questions properly, or it doesn't matter, or something. But I guess on physics, orthogonal means orthogonal, so we're kind of wondering what's wrong, right? Why are these things correlated? And they correlate because those endpoint descriptors are blurry. They blur on top of each other. So this is just plotting a couple of things and rotating them around. So you can see valence dominance, clearly not a random thing. We'll get into it in a better way. But if you rotate it around, you start to see that, in fact, there's sort of a disk in this VAD space, right? It's not uniformly, randomly spread around. So that means if we do some dimensional reduction, we're going to get a better view of this. This is variance explained, right? Simple stuff. For VAD, so the valence one, which is the good bad one, is the dominant one. But we do SVD, then we get singular values 34, and the SVD for that is 55, 35, 9, right? So now it's really, there's a third dimension that doesn't matter as much. I will show you how we'll rotate these things around, but I'll give you some pictures. Let's go to that. I don't know if you can see this very well. Or if you can I see it very well? Okay, so this is the original data set with these words being scored on the VAD, and this is just valence here and dominance. And so as you go around, it makes sense, right? So these are words out here, enjoyable, feel good, happily. These are all very positive. And then as you get to dominant and positive, you start to see things like winning, right? Success is here, triumph, and so on. And as you move away from positive, it starts to become somewhat more controlling, captain, govern, dominate. You come around here, you start to get to negative things, so it's more war-like things, right? Violence. And then this is sort of violence at scale, weapon, dictator, and that becomes more individual, there's murderer, these sorts of things, and then it becomes kind of not an outside thing, but more internal, depressed, and eventually, horrifying, these sorts of things, down to pointless. And so there's sort of a zero-ness here, right? Penniless, insignificant. And as you move back here, these are pretty good, right? Small, sheep, weave, blah, blah. All right, so this gives you a sense of it. I mean, we have lists of all things, and you have to kind of stare at these things and try to make sense of them. That's just the annotation thing. So this is I hope you can see this. Maybe it's hard to read. Okay, so this is the top line here is valence, arousal, and dominance, right? And it's just the 3 pairwise ones. You can see that the fit here, it's an SVD fit. It's off, right? These are not at right angles to each other. SVD, we're going to interpret these axes as aggression, goodness, aggression, and structure. And I'll kind of explain why that seems right. Obviously a bit too quickly, but I'll do it. And if you rotate this one around, then we get what we'll call power, danger, structure. Okay, so in this one, this is sort of the core one, you can see now we've got good things over here, bad things here, and then this is danger, really. Battle, firearm, nuke. And so the original VAD and EPA didn't have a sense of danger. It is one of the underlying semantic differentials in the very original studies, but it's clear that this is harm and this is non-harm, right? Siesta, calm, slow, soft. So it's not just activation. It's not just high energy, low energy. This is danger, and this is just a really primary measure of meaning, right? I mean, our negative emotions are geared towards danger. And so we'll come back to that with characters as well. So for characters, it's going to be dangerous, going to be demons, safe is going to be angels, powerful is going to be heroes, and weak are going to be fools, and there'll be all this in between. So the rotation, and I guess I can do it here, this is good, the rotation to that first dimension is just kind of making this observation that if we do it, we'll end up with triumphant, victorious, right? There's winning out here and zeroness over here, which feels like a good axis, right? And really, there's no perfect way to do this, but this seems meaningful, and I'll show you why it actually becomes the right framework later on. So there's sort of nothingness here versus power and almighty, and then again we have danger up here, which is that sort of focused danger. The murder is here, serenity is here, and again war and sports are here, competition. These are things falling apart. All right, so then we end up with what's called a circumplex type model, or has been in the past. So powerful, we have aggressive, we have dangerous, we have bad, we have weak over here, and then gentle, and then safe. These words, we have to put one word on top of them, but it's always to be interpreted. Okay, we'll leave that. So there's a third dimension, and it's structure and unstructure. And if you see down here, you have things like stereotype, pantheon, corporation. Buddhism is here, diplomat, boss. Up here, comical, juggling, and so on. So these, it's really, you have to divide it like this. Everything up here takes on a randomness, and structure is down here. So that third dimension, which we'll see, which we can argue or say is that suggests it's a dimension of evolution, right? It's change versus no change. And for characters, it's going to be adventurers and traditionalists, which is, okay. We have MRIs, right? So you can do this sort of thing. You can go through. Part of this is vibe stuff, right? We're trying to understand what these words are, right? So we're going from, this is the powerful weak axis here, the dangerous safe one. And as we move through it, we're going from structured, so there's Congress, boss, senator. As we sort of slice through, we're going to move to less structured. And it's kind of like a temperature measure, less structured. As the structure number goes up, it's so for example, there's some sexual stuff here for sure. Panicked, cheesy, where these things start to take on less predictableness. And eventually at the other end, okay, I'll leave those aside. There are connections between them, doesn't matter too much. We'll go past that. All right, so let's connect this back to some earlier work. This is, I guess 10 years ago, published in PNAS. We got 24 corpora for 10 different languages around the world, where we put them together. We had to have at least 5,000 words in each corpus. And so there are things like news, music lyrics, Google Books data is in there, social media, so some Twitter. It's a real mixture, some subtitle things. And for example, so we have to choose then a population to evaluate these words. And so Spain, for example, we had people from Spain evaluating, from Mexico evaluating Spanish. For English, we had the US. But it's a real spread of languages. Not surprisingly, the word for the country is very positive in each one. So Russia is very fond of Russia. So when we translated into Ukrainian, we had to change that. The big thing from this was that there was this positivity bias, right? So these are all these different corpora, 24 corpora. You can see maybe there's sort of a trend. So Portuguese evaluate people in Brazil. So there's, it's a social measure, right? It's actually what is being used and how people might feel about it. We include for English the, of, and, right? We take the most common 5,000 words and see how they play out. So all the yellow side means above the median, right? So, or the neutral point, which is 5. 9 is the most positive, just in this rating system. You can see it's 2 Likert scales coupled together, 2 5-point Likert scales. So all of these different corpora across all these languages have a positivity bias. This fits in with the Pollyanna principle, which had been actually Osgood is part of that as well. In interactions that are more positive than negative, obviously very negative things happen between people, but the preponderance of interactions are positive, and that's in words, it's in language. So when you're doing sentiment analysis, much of which is a kind of a disaster, if you're seeing some sort of positive score, that's just the nature of language, right? It's just the nature of language. So we're going to come back to that by looking at types, right? We looked at types, right? Each word got one vote in all of the stuff I've showed you. But when we go to text, we have, right, a word is repeated, then that has more weight. It has to. So we're just going to simply take them by words by how much they appear. And so we'll have different corpora. We've got English fiction for 120 years, Jane Austen's novels, the Sherlock Holmes stories for 20 years in the New York Times, one dump of Wikipedia, radio talk, so these are automatic transcriptions from the Media Lab, of talk radio for about 2 or 3 years, I think, and then Twitter through this thing we have called Storyline. Twitter's 10 years, maybe there, yeah. Okay. So this again are these histograms, and kind of the thing, but now we've got counts for words instead of just one vote each. And you can see that this is not aligning. I mean, this didn't align following away, but where the preponderance of words is, it's not matching up that well. And you see in this, the one that SVD produces, not great either, right? There's definitely sort of an angle to it. And then when we get down to this is dangerous, safe this way, powerful, weak across here, there is, and you can see in these histograms on the side, we have low danger words is the story for language, right? The power weak set of words, pretty balanced. And so happiness, sadness is this axis. So what's happening with the Pollyanna principle is a 1D imprint of a two-dimensional compass of meaning where we tend to stay with safe words, right? Or safer words or low danger words. Dangerous words, words that reference danger, very important, quite varied. They matter, but it's a boy who cried wolf. We can't be using them all the time, or we don't exist in situations where we need to use them all the time. So, okay, let me just. This is Jane Austen, and all I really want you to see is maybe these two kind of bricks here as we go through. This is Sherlock Holmes. You can see this is off, this is okay. This is Wikipedia. This is radio talk. This is Twitter, right? So they all have that same kind of pattern. They're really different corpora. That's putting them all together in the power danger one. So what this says is, yes, well, we will have power, aggression, danger, aggression, power, goodness. We can talk about these sort of 8 points of the compass. But if we want our minimal description, just three dimensions, then it actually is very reasonable to have this powerful power danger framework because it lines up with real language, which is surprising. So we'll call it, it's not a great thing, but DAPGS refers to danger, aggression, power, goodness, and structure. And that's the framework. All right. This is an exploded Rubik's Cube of it. I'll come back to it later on, but this is that first dimension here. Powerful here is weak here, dangerous, safe. And then basically I'm structured this way and structured this way. We'll come back to that. You can do all these things, right? Fun. Okay. All right, so some other work that we did before that, very good shapes of stories, which familiar with perhaps. I mean, he tried to get this done as a master's thesis at University of Chicago, and they told him no. And it's very enjoyable to read his discussions of this. Even in 2005 or 6, he was very upset. He used a lot of swear words. He was still mad at them for turning him down. I guess it was better than selling Saabs on the Cape. But he had this idea of shapes of stories, right? And so we have a paper in 2016 where we basically use this happiness measuring instrument, this hedonometer thing, to go through a bunch of books. And we have online interactive things. This is, I mean, Boffin's proved that Frankenstein ends badly. These sorts of things we'll just touch on. This is basically type calculus or thing calculus, or in this case, word calculus, right? So we've got a difference. We're looking at some score going up or down for some sentiment. Of course, it's built out of words, so we have these ways of visualizing which words are being used more or less and how they're contributing. Call them word shifts. Harry Potter, right? So lots of these are all interactive. You can slide around with them. This is when Dumbledore eats it. Pulp Fiction. This is Bring Out the Gimp. All right, and so we got 6 overall stories out of that, just for shapes. This is Rags to Riches. This is Tragedy. This is what Vonnegut called Man in a Hole, right? So think someone starts off okay, things go wrong, get out of it. Looks like, sitcoms everywhere. This is what we call Cinderella, which he was fond of showing that kind of curve. This is Oedipus, does not end well, and this is Icarus. This is also, just quickly, this is, and we said this before the 2016 election, this is Make America Great Again. So it's a story in 4 words, because it tells you about the past, the present, and the future, and it's from the advertising for Bush and Reagan and Bush in 1980. But it's been used since then by different people, including Clinton. But now it's a thing. But it is a story. It's a little story, right? It's a little story. Hope and change or whatever is a character thing, but this is a story. All right, so you can go out and measure all these things. I've just sort of touched on this. This is, Anna Karenina, 100 Years of Solitude, Gravity's Rainbow, and do this kind of thing. So this is Les Mis, Les Miserables, Powerful, Dangerous, with all the different time series here, and you can chart it through this 2-dimensional space and think about it, right? So this is, I'm just going to hop through it, but it's a little flipbook thing. Okay, stories. I mean, I think, how are we doing? How are we doing? Okay. Maybe we're not doing it. I've got time to mention. This is just showing that it fits with all these other different things. This is a circumplex model by Russell. It's about 1980, saying, I don't think these sort of. It's weird because I guess he's trying to say it doesn't really fit into an orthogonal space, but he got people to arrange. In this case, like kind of emotional, they're really kind of mental states, not just emotional, sort of psychological states perhaps, and some physiological. Arrange them around a circle, basically, and dial them out a little bit with some sort of magnitude. And so this is a redoing of his plot, one of those things where you go into Adobe and pick out the points. And he had the circumplex thing. So excitement, arousal, distress, misery, gloomy, sleepy, contentment. This is his framework. And the words sort of fit in okay. And so this is where, that's the original, this is the original paper. These are where those words are, in our reevaluation of the 20,000 words that have scores for VAD. So tense doesn't really, it's not really interpreted. This is a very different group of people. This is 35 years later. But excited is here, aroused, angry, defined with dangerous, sad and bored and droopy. They're in similar, most of them are in somewhat fairly similar places, which we couldn't hope for much more than that. So dangerous is distress, arousal is aggressive, which is different to just arousal is excitement, right? There's some violence or some danger involved. Excitement is power. So there are just a few of these, and I'll have a couple at the end, which I claim are reasonable fits. Stories matter, right? So I guess some of this will seem totally childish to some of you, but it is it's a bit of an odd thing. Some people say stories are childish, right? And then they're just for entertainment. But anyway, a lot of this book came out of thinking about social contagion and doing all these models, network stuff, and thinking about what things spread, and ultimately coming to stories and how do they get spread into the world. And for other people in other fields, that's what you start with, but that's kind of how I got to it. Stories are important. Stories are about survival, power, and danger. I'll say some strong things. You can handle that, of course. But they are about how we encode knowledge, how we share knowledge. Human stories have a particular feel to them. We're very good at telling stories and hearing stories about individuals, stories that involve collectives, things that we may need equations to describe. They're still stories. Navier-Stokes equation is a storytelling machine, right? But it's not a good story for us. We can simulate it, and we like fluids, perhaps. Sports are storytelling machines, right? They're spontaneous storytelling things. So the NFL and Jane Austen are, in the same basket. Okay. Well, I guess I don't prop bet on Jane Austen's next chapter. Can you imagine betting on? Anyway, all right. So, all right. How can we do it? So we'd like to operationalize this, right? We want to do this thing and turn things into numbers, of course, and put them in some kind of space as well as we can. We don't want to be doing AI things that are inscrutable and have black boxes. So in some ways, we're trying to simplify things so we can touch and feel it. So how do we somehow measure stories of scale? Like, what's the galaxy of all stories? Like, what's it mean to say there's a galaxy of stories? Space of it, if you like. And how do they vary across time and culture? Many of you will be familiar with this, and we watched a modern version of this yesterday. We're attempting to actually, do it with visualizations. This is XKCD, and it's putting its temporal character. It doesn't really quite. I mean, if you know the story, you go yes. It doesn't quite tell you. It tells you some interactions where someone dies, for example, but generally it's not really got any. There's no flavor of what the interactions are like, right? Is this a romantic one? Is someone deceiving someone? I mean, that's fair enough. This was a fun thing. 12 Angry Men is a bit easier to plot as contrasted by time travel, which time travel stories are fun, but you shouldn't think about them. This is Princess Bride, and this is Empire Strikes Back, best Star Wars film. So it's a three-dimensional thing, Cliffs of Insanity, for example, and it's all this character. So people have had a lot of fun with this. How do you automate that in a way that is helpful? So this has sort of just always been sitting around. Yeah, how do you understand this, right? So Hillary Clinton murders baby. So we're going to step back from stories to characters. Tim has explicated this, and I think there should be a citation for you there. There it is. So it's character. I don't know, just name its character. How do they understand? Why do people think that story is plausible? And people absolutely did. It's because at that point you have a demon and a witch, more specifically, right? Who of course could do something like that. So in demonization is right. This, and we'll get to it, I suppose, but it's the process of partly telling stories about someone so that you start to think, yes, they are this or hero or whatever it is. And then the next story you tell could, make sense or not make sense, and you add it to it or you discard it, right? You're a hero, you believe in your hero. Someone tells a bad story about them, maybe hanging out with a guy in Florida, and you just say, no, that didn't happen. Or it's being made up, right? Stories matter, right? So stories matter. Okay. Yeah. I mean, why would we do that if stories didn't matter? So stories are character. So then again, some very minute things. Stories are characters plus time, and the characters can be more than that. But let's just take characters. Implicit in this sort of very simple statement is interactions, context, environment, events happening. So stories can be this much more elaborated thing. It does. I think I've messed up some of my things here. So stories are sort of emergent. If you can, it is a bit of an equation. Stories minus time equals characters, right? You tell stories about someone or something, you start to develop a character for them. And then there's also stories minus characters is just time. Waiting for Godot with no one waiting is just time. Yeah. Wow. I'm having fun. And then representation. So there's two reasons for characters being so important or something to focus on is, right, that's how stories run. And characters, fictional characters matter because character matters, right? Representation matters. We have a sort of an odd relationship. We understand parasocial relationships have effects on people, that people sort of want to go into archaeology because of Indiana Jones movies. People, right, do things because of fictional characters in front of them. Okay. That should be out there. Okay. So how do we do this? We're going to try some Jung, but with data and probably not much Jung. Okay, but he's the archetype guy. So this is Tom Gould. This is a little Tom Gould thing. But there are all these little archetypes running around, and Stith Thompson, right? There's some floating around in motif space, like the magical cat or whatever. So we sort of have a zoo of those. How do we make a list? These are pretty great, actually. Right. What's the typology of characters? And so we'll get to something that fits in dimensions, in a simple dimensional space, because in a way, very simple-minded person speaking. Okay, so there's a 4 or 5 year work on this. Archetypometrics is the thing, and Tim is on board is one of the authors. We didn't really know what to do with this, so it exists on Zenodo. It's 1,100 pages. There's 100 pages for the main paper. Just read the first 2 pages, and then there's sort of 1,000. It's all very interconnected. There's an unbelievable, ridiculous LaTeX thing underneath it all. I'll show you this in a little bit. There's a kind of a card collection online. They're all PDFs. They're all intellect. So okay. So yeah, this cat Pratchett. And this is a completely different data set from the evaluations of words that we use to get to essential meaning. So we're going somewhere else. This is, in a sense, a found data set for us. It seems to be by a serious academic outfit, but it's a funny look. Yeah, sorry, let's open if I can. Yeah, it's not a great website. It's pretty powerful. So there are tons of little studies in here, and lots of papers have been written based on this. But basically, you come in here and you say, whoop, and you've got a 100-point little semantic differential slider thing. There's evidence that using slider things like this is pretty good, actually, because you can kind of play around with it and you can vibe evaluate it. There's some improvements to that. Okay, so you ran through a bunch of these things. You can do, I think, 36 is the minimum, but maybe 80. But it turns out to be 460. If we throw away emoji things, because it's a problem, there are 464 semantic differentials. So it's incredibly rich set of evaluations. And then social reclusive, frugal lavish, and you can evaluate yourself, right? So that's sort of the idea, and you see who you might be closest to. That's the game for this. There are 2,000 fictional characters associated with it. You get to be, once you do this little evaluation, it pops out with a list of characters. And that's sort of fun. And then you participate, you evaluate the characters yourself, if you know the stories. This is people must, fictional characters closest to my male cat. I mean, cats are gendered as female, right? You can look in LLMs to sort of get that. But they're all powerful, dangerous females. And then, of course, we have Hannibal Lecter thrown in as well, because, he's a cat, but he's a serial killer. All right. Okay, so his serial killing days are gone, I think. 200 characters, as I said, 464 traits, over 340 stories, 70 million evaluations. So it's a fantastic data set. What essentially this means is you do other things, but there's a 2000 by 464 matrix. The characters are labeled here, the traits are labeled here, they're all semantic differentials. You do dimensional reduction on it and try to interpret what the first, second, third dimensions are. This is to give you a sense of who's big. And so by big, this means each character has a point in 464 dimensional trait space, and you just measure the magnitude of that vector. And so when you're evaluating these characters, so Joffrey's the biggest character, right? And it doesn't mean they're the most powerful, whatever, but they're just the most outsized character. And so that kind of language, outsized or one-dimensional character, has some sort of meaning here. But that's, so people, when they're evaluating Joffrey, they dial him right out, right? So there's an empath, psychopath, semantic differential. If you know this story, he's psychopath, right? And then these other characters, many of them are kind of demon type characters, but there's, there are comedians in, like Tracy Jordan, or funny humans in here, Wexler. Eric Cartman, we'll come back to Eric Cartman later on. Turns out to be an interesting archetype. Okay, so different ways of looking at this. We're going to interpret the first dimension as I'll just say that it's full hero. That every time we mention full, we'll also have this more complex semantic differential: weak, incompetent, lazy, stupid versus powerful, capable, purposeful, intelligent. So all these graphs will have that somewhere. So these are the most aligned traits and the most negatively aligned traits, right? Because you have to, all characters and the characters with the largest components, all these different ways you might want to break this down. But yeah, so this is the first dimension, really wraps around competence, right? And capability. So low, and there's a lot of work to make sure you've got them all in the right order, right? They're not in the right, they'll all be flipped with respect to each other. Yeah, perceptive, hierarchy. So these are like intelligent things. So these are innate, resourceful, diligent, so not giving up. And then these are characters who are aligned and unaligned. So Kate Beckett from Castle, I ended up watching this show because she came out as the #1 hero, character. I'm like, I need to understand this. We'll have some stuff about gender later on. It's actually the characters most aligned with that first dimension, the good side of it, are hero women, actually. We'll touch on it later. And then these are complete, in Australia you might say duffers. These are losers, zeros, complete fools. Nelson Spaghetti, of course, becomes president of Stanford, so not a complete failure. The Silicon Valley fans. So these are another one of these ousiogram things. So you have to some care with all of this. Quit a persistent, competent, right? This is the trait space. This is how the traits are aligned in the first dimension and the second dimension. And it has that kind of same feel that's just popped out. We're not doing anything weird with this. They're dangerous up here, right? Vengeful, naughty, demonic, straight up demonic, competitive. Here it's a little more, these are dominators over here. So bossy, bold, opinionated. And as you go around, you get this sort of failing aspect, right? This is where disease kind of was for meaning. And then you get nothingness out here, just fail, just zeroness. Failure is actually here. It's not really opposite to success. Then you get this sort of, these are innocents, these angel fools, meek and bossy, meek, not bossy, that's what that means. And then all the way around, we'll call these ones paragons, right? Angel heroes. You might see, so one was, there are lots of details, but villainous heroic is across here. And that's because villains and heroes are at right angles to each other, right? That's not a proper semantic differential. Heroes are opposite to fools and villains are opposite to angels. So you're adding two things that are at 90 degrees. All right, details. Goes in, the third and fourth dimension here, this is adventurous traditionalists. So chaotic, spirited, expressive, funny people are over here, serious, orderly. Divas up here, manicured, preppy, and then lone wolves are down here. And then the next one, the last, there are 6 dimensions. There are 3 primary ones, 3 secondary ones. Sophisticates versus outcasts. And again, there's all these sort of things. Unlucky, unsophisticated, traumatized versus geeks and brutes. All right, that's the trait side of it. And you have to sit there and stare at these things for a long time. But this is then where characters are. And this histogram here shows you where most of the characters are for all 2000. There's a bit of a heat map or sort of a density increase here. Stories, those 2 stories have more heroes than fools, right? The fools are important for comedies in particular, but most stories are driven by something actually happens. So you have more of it here. But if you go around here, you get these sort of captains of things. Adana from Battlestar Galactica. This is Jean-Luc Picard. Firelord Ozai is up here, and Azura, his daughter, right? So they're these dominated characters. Then you've got straight up demons like Joffrey and Voldemort's up here. Homelander from Boys. Maybe you don't know any of these things, but and Eric Cartman, yeah, so he's not great. Then these fool characters. Then you have these pushovers like Jerry Gogich from Parks and Rec. And then these just true angels like Radar O'Reilly from MASH and Beth Marsh and Jane Bennett. All right, same thing. You keep looking into these things, and we have all these lists and so on. Lone Wolves, for example, you've got Mad Max, my fellow countryman. Rachel Berry from Glee is a diva. Angela Martin is over here in the traditionalist category and so on. Right. All right, then we'll have the mixed archetypes. And there are 160 potential triple archetypes, like traditionalist demon hero. And that's a tyrant, someone who's predictable, dangerous, and powerful. So Tywin Lannister is there. Firelord Ozai is one as well. Adventurer demon, this is someone like Bart Simpson, for example. So these are unpredictable, dangerous. So we'll allow that to kind of elaborate. We have tons of these things. So this is what I showed you before. This is the meaning one, and then this is the version for characters, right? So demons and angels for dangerous and safe, and fools and heroes. As we go around, this sort of main one dominates for demon heroes, paragons, and wretches out here for demon fools and innocents. We've tried to name these other ones. It's not crucial. Okay, so the nutshell of this is that there are 3 primary archetype dimensions, 3 secondary ones, and the ousiometric alignment for the first 3 dimensions is just there. And we didn't do anything sneaky to make that happen. It just popped out. I didn't really touch on it too much, but the 5-factor model, the ocean model, or right openness, conscientiousness, that's long held sway now in psychology, matches up, right? So conscientiousness is a trait of fools and heroes. It's actually agreeableness, disagreeableness is in the second dimension, and so on. So that is still there, right? Which is kind of amazing. Okay, I'm not going to show you. We look at archetypes, so we're going to say if someone really points in a direction versus the next direction, we look at the ratio of how much variance explained is in one archetype direction, measured relative to the next one. We'll talk about an archetype ratio. Someone who's really a hero or someone who's really a tyrant. And you can kind of look around these things. So for example, these are the most archetypal characters. So from Money Heist, Marilla is like hero, just really points in that direction. So this is a really huge number. They really just have this one dimension. Tywin Lannister is absolutely a tyrant. Nurse Ratched is another tyrant. Obi-Wan Kenobi, angel hero. So this is the way of then kind of creating a list of archetypes and trying to and by their strength as well. Yeah, Olaf is an angel adventurer, which is very nice. Then big lists, I won't go through them, but big lists of like who are the leading, how many, I'm just going to tell you, how many characters are in these archetype classes? Are they all popular? And they're not. It's very much like a normal sort of social phenomenon where there's a skewed distribution. There are many angel heroes and demon heroes, but as you go down, there's sort of one in this category of diva angels, right? One brute hero, which is Hank Schrader from Breaking Bad. So lots of tables for these things. Same thing for 3 dimensions, triple archetypes. So a lot of adventurer angel heroes. So people are putting these into stories. They're building stories around them. But again, it falls away in that kind of very standard way. Outcast adventurer heroes down here. Lone wolf traditionalist hero. There are only a couple of those. Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad. All right. So there's this whole online system. It's a lot. And you can just play around with these things. So I guess I could just show you some of it, but they're PDFs, right? So if you get into this, you can zoom in on these things, and let's say, let's take Arrested Development, for example. Right, here's Arrested Development. You've got a list of the characters. Lucille Bluth is a demon, number 1 in that. So they're ordered by strength. It's a whole bunch of characters. And then you can look at where they are in these slices of archetype space. So this is, and I'll show you a whole bunch of these, but this is the first 2 dimensions, right? So heroes and fools and demons and angels. And if you know this show, right, there are this terrible family. It's got fools, it's got demons, it's got these wretches, and the one son who has to keep them together. And that's Michael, who's over here. This is very typical of comedies, right? That there is a bunch of mayhem being caused, and then someone who's holding it together. The only one that's different from this, I think, is Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where they're all terrible people. But the way that works to realize is that they can at any point pivot and be the straight man to the other 2 who are being complete idiots. And of course, then they have their own plan, which is completely terrible behavior. Okay, so that's a big, like there are 33,000 cards. You can kind of search through them. I'll show you. Right, so there are cards for things like traits. So this is a critter persistent. You can see which traits are close to it. Who has, so Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec has the biggest persistent score. You flip them around, all these sorts of things. This is Angel Demonic, for example, matches up with our interpretation. The biggest demon is Freddy Krueger. It's not surprising. I mentioned some of these. Lumberjack Mad Scientist, right? So Geek really pops up for Mad Scientist. Rick Sanchez there from Rick and Morty. Good stuff. Whimsical is fun. Tracy Jordan gets number 1. Patrick Starr from, it's such a collection of, such a weird collection. Adventurer 4. Yeah, right? They're just, I mean, it's just to show there are all kinds of traits in here. And then they get somewhat complex things. They're archetype cards like hero. This is an adventurer demon card. And so on. I just showed you this one. This needs to be like that. Rest Development, I just showed you this. So here are a few others. This is Community. It's another comedy, right? You have some wretches, some demons, and then, people who are more competent keep it together. The Simpsons, pretty bad, actually. The only person in there who has real competence is Lisa, but there are some angels. The Office, I mean, it's a great little, so these have then become, and we have sort of a diagnostic of this, there are sort of imprints of particular kinds of stories. So The Office, just as it set up, and this is the first 2 dimensions again, there are no real heroes, which is its setup, right? And in fact, the ones who are the leaders are on the full side, Michael Scott and Andy Bernard. But it's a real, ensemble cast. Always Sunny, as I said, they're just terrible people. Dennis may be a serial killer, probably. Harry Potter, big spread, right? So this is like a big ensemble drama. You've got a bunch of demons, lots of paragons. This is Sherlock. So Sherlock shows, right, they follow a real a real template, right, from the original Sherlock, which is a bunch of good people who are confident what they do, and then someone who's an outsider. And, you know, for Psych, it's like Sean, who's unpredictable and funny and so on. You know, this guy's a bit of Sherlock. The original Sherlock's a bit of a demon. Pride and Prejudice. So lots of Sherlock type shows. The procedurals are actually, they're always just good people, basically. That's not, yeah. And there's one demon each week. Pride and Prejudice, right? So this is a classic drama. We've got some real angels in here. We've got our main characters who eventually come together, but they separate in the next dimension. Elizabeth is an adventurer. Mr. Darcy is a traditionalist. And there's some mayhem to drive the story along, that they have to save these Wickham and Lydia and so on. And then there's a demon problem. This is Buffy. I like Buffy. The Boys is a superhero kind of one. Just to give you a vision. So Game of Thrones is war, and war is this quadrant, right? War is power and danger. There are some paragons, but mostly they get murdered pretty quick. Yeah. And Joffrey is out here being a bad character. One angel, Samuel Tarly. Right, and then we have these cards for characters. You can kind of just, you know, you can click on these and search around and all this sort of thing. That's Buffy and Willow, Sherlock and Watson. You can see they're both hero characters. And what I'll show you next is a way to compare them. So this is basically an exploded inner product. I'll just flash through these things. This is a histogram again. And so this is a case where no one really knows who's which. So they're basically the same character. So they're both short, and they're both cheery, and they're both friendly, and they're both childlike. And there's sort of a reciprocal of those things down here. So I like to make these map and list things. This is a map. This is a list of the things they match up on the most. So they're very similar characters. So this is it's a kind of, yeah, it's a Buffy and Willow, right? So they're different, but they're both heroes, but they separate on things like withdrawn, beta, bookish, awkward. That's for Willow. Follower versus a leader. So I'll just flash some of these up. That's Sherlock and Watson, right? So this is they're an interesting pair. And then there's sort of these two different lists. These orange means differ, green means similar. You can kind of get in there and explore them. Geek demon hero versus an outcast hero angel. Joffrey, very different to Sam from Ted Lasso, right? They're really different. So you see where they separate. Fool, kind, psychopath, empath, punchable, lovable. Also, Jane Bennett and Sid Phillips from Toy Story, who's really pretty much a monster. I'll show you some others. Let me see. Oh, yeah. So this is Angela Martin and Nurse Ratched, right? They're very different stories. One flew over the cuckoo's nest and The Office, but they're basically the same character, right? It's heavily weighted up here, and they basically just match up on all these things, right? So, what is it? Handshake, serious, routine, schedule, closed-minded, cat person, strict, tight, rigid, resist change. Okay. Rick Sanchez and House, same character. This is Mallory Archer and Lucille Blue, played by Jessica Walter, basically just manifested the same character. This is John Benjamin, who is Sterling Archer, and Bob Belcher, very different, interesting things. This is the same character, same actor, playing two different characters. Again, same actor. You know, anyway, there's a little bit about range. These are two different Sherlock instances of Sherlock Holmes, basically the same. So there's a bit of a durability thing. Two Hannibal Lecters. That's where, you know, you can't, you're typecast yourself because you only have one way of acting. All right. Okay. All the fairy tales are kind of interesting. They're very bluntly different. Yeah. Okay. That's Snow White and the Queen. All right. So a bunch of those. We can move past those into these things. Yeah. So I did this test where I said, pretend you're a supporter. This is like last year. Pretend you're a supporter of a particular political character who's running for president, probably. Pretend that you're sort of an average one. Pretend you're an average person who's against them. And the one that popped up for against was Eric, the closest character. We did this sort of as a class, was Eric Cartman. So I think it's an interesting. All right, I like it more. Just a couple of last things. D&D, right? There are lots of other things where we have spaces. So D&D, of course, we have, people realize characters and then they tell stories from it, right? We have a character, you act that character and you interact in various ways. The alignment charts have been around there for a long time. This is to show that that alignment chart works out. It's a slice of the Ousiometric one. So this slice here, which is adventurous, and traditionalist versus dangerous and safe. So there's that one. So that could be a little paper, I guess. Chipper's Laws of Human Stupidity. If you're unaware of that, you should go and enjoy it. It's pretty great. His framework is this: is that people are, they fall somewhere in here. They're harmful to themselves or helpful to themselves, harmful to others, helpful to others. So help harm. Stupid people, which is focused on they exist here. They hurt themselves and others, and that fits in with these are our wretches, right? Demon fools. So just again, one slice. It's actually the primary slice of this space, matches up. This is some just recent work. We're getting close to doing this. We can look at things like, okay, let's look at the hero dimension. That's this one, for example. And these are canonically female characters versus canonically male characters. So there is a bias towards being a hero for female. Pretty close for demons, and demons are here. Females are more likely to be divas, right? Versus lone wolves. I mean, that doesn't mean they are. I just mean trained in that direction, and so on. And then you have some nuanced things in there where you can look at. I'm about to finish. So these are pretty interesting. So these are say again, this is that first dimension hero fool, right? So we're going to hero fool. These are whether those characters are more feminine or masculine. So so they're really spread out, but the more heroic a male character is, the more masculine they are. Makes sense. But that's true of female characters as well, right? The more heroic are, they take on more masculine traits. You see other things like, let me say another, like this one. This makes sense, of course. This is more adventurer. It's not that one. That's this dimension here. These are pretty extreme. So divas, right? The more a female character, canonically female character is a diva, they become more feminine. That's true for the males as well, right? They become more feminine. So some things, literary criticism or whatever you want to do with it, but we've quantified and set it up on something. Okay, there's some nutshells here, but very different databases, right? So data sets that we started from. One I feel is correcting something kind of like wrong 75 years ago. Is it that long ago? Yeah. With Osgood, great work, but it just kind of went off on this track with activity and activation being important, and danger was not really seen to be understood to be salient. So we have a compass of essential meaning, and then the archetype thing, right? Flowing stories down to characters plus time. There are a lot of these things overlapping each other, right? It matches up with the essential meaning one. It matches up with these kind of fun ones like Chippewa, the law of, and D&D and so on, and other works like I'm not talking about here. But we're sort of seeing it pop up everywhere, and that's dangerous, right? You can find your thing wherever you look, but I don't know. We've done this for a while, and I think it's sort of staying. And if you want to create a company and get rid of Myers-Briggs, I guess we could do. Okay, so that's the end. There's a few things here, but that's me. Okay.
Great. So join me in thanking. Very deep work. I've been following this and involved in it for quite a while now, and it's always a little bit daunting when Peter says, "Hey, I've got a draft." You look at it and you open it up, and it's 1,400 pages long, and so but it's a wealth of riches. So I want to open the floor to questions, and online, if you also have questions, put them in the chat, and I will alternate back and forth. So please, the floor is open.
Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. I wondered how you extracted the character traits, because I was part of a project where we tried to actually find it on the textual surface, and then to actually then can also point back to the text passage where we get the information on, so that the character is, I don't know, is having long blonde hair or whatever.
Yeah.
So how are you?
Yeah. So
when did you get the?
So a separate study. We didn't run the study, right? So it's a separate study. So 70 million evaluations where you are straight up asked, here's Bart Simpson, naughty, nice.
Okay.
and you evaluate it. So it's online. People, this is one of these very successful kind of surveys where it's just open, and because there's a fun thing to do, people spread it, right? So they evaluate themselves. It's like, oh, I'm like, actually, I got Ava from Ex Machina and Dolores from Westworld. So I guess female androids that wake up and destroy everything. Anyway, so I did get Bell for my wife. So it was really good. So you can evaluate. You can just do this survey and you're contributing to it. But you have to, when it comes to a story, you say, do you know Game of Thrones? And you say, yes, I know. Well, and then you can start evaluating.
Okay, so there's no.
It's human done.
Okay.
It's everything is, which I still really like.
Yeah.
But yeah, extracting things from books, like extracting characters from books, if we just feed in Pride and Prejudice with no other knowledge of it,
Okay.
right? That's really tough. That's really tough.
Okay, thank you.
Because you bring so much to reading the book. Yeah. So it really, and there's, I didn't really talk about, there's tremendous robustness in it. We tested all these things because we have different sizes of the data set. So as it got bigger, Joffrey's still a bad guy. Like it didn't, and that hero, for all of that architecture stayed the same. And I'm not going to go into it, but it really is robust. Yeah.
Can I push you a little bit on this this idea of Ousiometrics?
Yeah.
All right. So like so what do you think about this? So you're really appealing to the inner essence of what a word is, right? Like the intrinsic nature of it that has to be part of its identity. That the word would not exist if it wasn't a combination of these discrete axes that you're finding. Where you could think about opposing this to an alternative view that is there are many different ways of carving up the world that we're organizing it in different ways, right? As outside perspectives on the meaning of those terms. So how do you think about it? What is the ultimate essence of meaning for an individual word?
Yeah. So the earlier stuff that we emulated earlier studies when we did what was VAD. We really just did valence, right? So we did that for 10,000 words across these 10 languages. So we made our own thing. And the framing we had there, and I think is really it depends how these other studies were done, right? But when you look at something they're kind of doing like this, which is what experience do you have when you read this word? That's it. So then you can look at the robust, how does that vary across different languages? So for example, murder, people rate that as bad, right? That's an unhappy, and you see across languages, it's very durable, right? If that wasn't true, then we'd have to drop it. So it's very coarse, but it is a social measure. It is, because on the one hand, it's like, these are the common words that are used in a language, which you have to go by corpus, and then how does on average person respond to it? And you've got to look at the variance and all sorts of things. So it's not supposed to be where you think, and of course there's listening as well, right? Like all the different meanings of words. That's a heavy-tailed thing for some words. But there is a dominant word that people respond to. When we've done some of the translations, for example, when you go from English to Spanish, I can't remember, like the word lying, Spanish, if you just translate lying directly, that's new. I might mean falsehood more. Like the dominant meaning. Anyway, it just means that it can be, there are a few like that, but generally speaking, it's pretty robust. The question is like, then if you want to make a composite measure, so what we do is very naive for measuring happiness or whatever, is we just add up the words that appear, their scores, these offline scores, and average them. And that's the thing is then that if you go through a book, it absolutely runs through, it matches the book. For Twitter, right, we had this whole thing for Twitter for 15 years. But I'll show you. This is hedonimeter. It's pretty fine resolution, but this is, let's go to a fun year. What's a fun year? 2020. This is day scale, right? And we're just we've taken these scores for these words, which again they're robust across languages, and that's across different kinds of raters, different ages, different places. This is then just averaging the words on a day on Twitter in English, and using this lens. It's kind of a lens, right? So all of these words come along. We have scores for some of them. They go into our bucket. The other ones sleep past. And so the lowest day ever, and this is now, an archival project because this guy called Musk said we can't have the Twitter data anymore. This is actually the Sunday, is it the Sunday of, Sunday after George Floyd's murder on the Monday. So protests are gathering, or building. You see a mixture, but you start to see some of the conspiracy theories, like you'll see Antifa, for example, doing some. So this is, I guess, partly saying like it matches up with the stories that we kind of know are there, and then you can start to find things that, when you go to stuff that you're not sure about, you can maybe we can feel much more secure. But these things are really important. If I just tell you it goes down,
Great. We have unfortunately reached the end of our time in this room, and I know there are many, many questions. If you have signed up for the afternoon, I am delighted to be able to invite you to the AI Futures Lab, which is sponsored by the University of California Investments and Berkeley Institute for Data Science, and we'll be having our roundtable discussion down there. It's in the WeWork building, and somebody will be there to let you in, and that at 2 p.m. Is it at 2 p.m., Lily? 2:30 p.m. Sorry, my internal clock is a little bit off. But again, I wanted to thank Peter for coming the long way from Vermont to join us in what turned out to be an absolute deluge of rain yesterday. That wanted to make him feel at home.
well, no,
Yeah, because they have beautiful snow. But I want to thank you again for this really stimulating, fascinating talk. So thank you, Peter.
Okay.